we ready to get going? All right, so welcome everybody to this morning's Birch webinar. I hope everybody is staying safe and healthy. Thankfully, this is already a webinar, so you're all planning on not being here in person anyways. So today's topic is executive presence, and we had many people register for the meeting. And we have two really wonderful speakers today, Dr. Judy Regensteiner and Dr. Virginia Miller. And before I introduce them, I would just like to remind everybody that in the bottom of your screen, there is a chat box. So if you have any additional questions, you can type them in the chat box, and at the end of their talk, I will go through them. We had many wonderful questions submitted prior to the meeting, and I have some that we'll go over. Some will be answered by Dr. Regensteiner and Dr. Miller in their presentations. We probably won't have time for all of them, but I'll get through as many as we can. So first, we'll have Dr. Miller. Dr. Miller is a professor of surgery and physiology and the director of the Women's Health Research Center at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. She received her undergraduate education at Slippery Rock University in Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, and an MBA from the University of Minnesota, and her PhD in physiology from the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. Her research includes work with experimental animals and clinical studies focusing on how sex steroids like estrogen and conditions unique to women such as pregnancy and menopause affect cardiovascular health and cognition. She currently serves as PI of Mayo's Building Interdisciplinary Careers in Women's Health, or Birch Scholars Program, as you're all familiar with, and co-PI of the Mayo Clinic SCORE Center, or Specialized Center of Research Excellence on Sex Differences. She has authored over 275 original publications and reviews and received numerous awards, including the Bernadine Healy Award for Visionary Leadership in Women's Health in 2014, the Women's Day Magazine Red Dress Award in 2015 for her work in research and advocacy for women's health, and the Paul Van Hoot named Lecturer in Vascular Pharmacology in 2018 from the American Society for Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics. She has worked with international groups in the promotion for inclusion of sex and gender variables in basic and medical curricula and research, and in addition to service on various grant review panels and editorial boards for scientific journals, she served as a member of the governing council for the American Physiologic Society and president of the Organization for the Study of Sex Differences, or OSSC. And next up we have Dr. Judy Regensteiner. So Dr. Regensteiner and I are both at the University of Colorado, and she is my wonderful mentor and Birch PI. She is a professor of medicine and the Judith and Joseph Wagner Chair of Women's Health Research and the principal investigator of the Colorado Birch grant. She is very experienced mentor and teaches a course entitled Women's Health and Leadership Training. And I am a current Birch Scholar, about to be an NHLBI K23 Scholar. I'm an assistant professor of pediatric endocrinology at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus, and my area of research focuses on sex and gender differences in youth and their impact on cardiometabolic health. In particular, I study individuals born with intersex conditions or disorders of sex development and those who identify as transgender. So with those introductions, I will turn it over to Drs. Miller and Regensteiner for their presentation, followed by questions at the end. And for those of you who came on a few minutes late, if you have other questions that you want to ask, please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen.
Okay, greetings everybody, welcome. Dr. Regensteiner and I are very excited to be able to present this to you today on what executive presence is and how you develop it. We're gonna tag team this presentation today, and Dr. Regensteiner is gonna start us off.
Okay, hi everyone, and thanks for tuning into this webinar in these tough times. I'm thinking of our young scholars all the time and thinking of ways to be helpful to them during this time, and knowing that this will not be forever. So I just wanted to say that and to remember that and keep going. Our talk today is really focused on the question, and some of you already have asked about it, why it is not all about content. Why is what we say not the only important thing? Why is how we say it and how we present ourselves and our ideas very important? And we're going to give you our thoughts on that matter. We're talking today about executive presence, which is a blending of temperament, competencies, and skills that when combined send all the right signals. Leaders know they must embody executive presence to get ahead, influence others, and drive results. Our advice to you is to take yourselves seriously. I actually have attended talks by junior faculty that are spectacular, but I've also been to a talk where a brilliant woman said out loud that, well, with my pea brain, I couldn't think anymore about this, and there's a way to make yourself not be listened to, and terrible, because this is an absolutely brilliant woman. Or we'll talk about some of the other ways in which people negate their message. And you just don't want to do that. You want to be respected and listened to. And even though many of us suffer from imposter syndrome at various times, that isn't the message you want to project. So setting expectations, executive presence represents the choice to show respectful, mature poise while holding people to a higher standard and energizing them in good, bad, and ordinary times. And that's no different now than it ever is. In a way, you're going to see people as others, or you want people to see you as you see you, or even better, but you want to be seen for what you have to offer in terms of intellectual content. When people are listening to you, you want them to see what you have come to present. So what are the elements of executive presence?
And I think that many of you, with all the discussion on TV with coronavirus and people making very important decisions, you can look at the individuals who are coming up to the microphone and use those as examples of what executive presence is. But let's give you some elements that you can take away. First of all, it's just really about seeing yourself as others do. How you think you present yourself and how others see you may not necessarily be matching. So sometimes it's good to get feedback as how others may consider you when you're doing your everyday work, conducting a meeting, giving a talk, interacting with colleagues in your office. So what this really encompasses that we'll focus on today is speaking and behaving in professional settings. So what are the components of this? Well, first of all, you have to have a certain amount of physical energy, temperament, and attitude. And some of that attitude comes with, I am the expert at this time giving you this particular bit of information. And I think you can see from even some of the presidential candidates how physical energy plays an important part in how people perceive somebody being competent and ready for a task. Of course, it encompasses apparel and facial expressions and gesture. And when we talk about apparel, we'll go into this a little bit more, but these are characteristics which give a first impression. And when you say, well, first impressions don't really matter, it's the content, first impressions matter. And if you're not expressing that particular look of authority, you're going to lose your audience and your message is going to get lost. Your body language is important. You don't want to be swaying all the time and have your hands all over in terms of drawing attention away from what you're saying. You want that to be paramount and do not want yourself to get in the way. Your words, tone, and speed of communication are important. How many of you, and I'm particularly sensitive to this, when I'm talking to somebody on the phone or even listening on the airplane to the instructions, it's so fast you can't understand what people are saying. It doesn't hurt to slow down your pace a little bit and emphasize the words which you think are important. And then you really need to be sensitive to the responsiveness and balance in interactions. How much is expected of you to participate rather than individuals around you? You have to be sensitive and aware. A competency is the underlying characteristic of a person that may be critical to the effective performance in a role. So knowledge is what you know, and this is going to give you the assurance and basis for everything else that follows. Now, there's a lot of concern. There were many questions about imposter syndrome. When we went through those, there were at least 3 questions about it. We have all suffered from this at some time in our careers. You know your material better than anybody else in the audience, and you have to become confident that it's okay if somebody asks you a question to say, I'm not really sure about that, but let's talk about it. I'll look into it. Those are okay answers, and it doesn't decrease your credibility. The one thing that I did that really got me over my imposter syndrome was the first time I had to write an article as a sole author. I stressed about that for weeks. I finally got it through, and when it came back from the reviewers, it was accepted. That helped me a lot to boost. So sometimes what you need to do is to take a first step by yourself without the backup of somebody else. Get their feedback, but publish that thing by yourself to increase your self-assurance about your competencies. Leadership on a person-based level is who you are. You really need to understand who you are in terms of being able and accept it, know your limitations and know your strengths. That will help you a lot in terms of person-based leadership. It's what you have achieved. It's your leadership style and who you can influence. What's your sphere of influence? Is this just the people in your laboratory, or are you going beyond that? What are your problem-solving skills? Is this a strength, or is this something you need to develop? How are you with conflict resolution, aligning those conflicts with organizational goals? And we had some Birch talks on conflict resolution, and these are also workshops and so on that you can attend to develop these skills. And then you need to really be able to self-manage your environment. What that means is you have to be authentic. Your internal authenticity is you have to mean what you say. And your external authenticity is saying what you mean. And again, you can look over the various candidates that were running for president, and you can identify individuals who did not have consistent authenticity, and they are no longer there. They fell out because their internal message and their external message were not matched. You can't always control your environment, and the environment that we're living in right now is a really good, it's a good example of that, but you can control your response to it. How are you going to respond in these times where you have to make decisions about how to work, where your laboratory is, how you're going to manage your family, and other meetings and so on that are going on around you? So, authentic executive presence is that you need to be professional all the time. And this was one of the questions that came up, is that how can I be myself? You know, if you're playing softball on the field, that's one thing. If you're in your office at a meeting, you need to have your executive presence there. And even in the social situations where scientists find themselves, you always represent who you are and what you do. So you really do need to have a bit of professionalism all the time. Okay, Judy.
Sure. I'm going to talk to you about 2 kinds of specific encounters, one of which is giving a talk, and the other is going to a meeting. And these are 2 specific occasions where there's an opportunity to present yourself, and where you are presenting yourself, and you're not just representing yourself personally, but you're also representing your thoughts and your institution. So you have to remember that. For instance, I'm the director of a Center for Women's Health Research. So when I speak for the center, I'm not just representing Judy Regensteiner, I'm representing the center. So it's really important to me to differentiate these things. A meeting, and in fact, giving a talk, these are not casual occasions. You're not just on your own then, talking about yourself as you would with your friends and your family. So you have to think about your body language and how you present yourself. Your apparel is also needs to be thought about. And in fact, your overall presentation of yourself and your content have to be thought about. And really, this brings people together. Some of the people that you will speak to or meet with will become friends, and then it's a different relationship. But when you're on a professional occasion, you need to remember that all the time. And it's not that it's bad, and it's not that it's inauthentic. It's just a matter of, it's a different setting than you are in your home, as I am right now, since my offices are closed. So next slide, Virginia.
Could I just comment a bit on apparel, because there was a question about how to dress in sort of the casual environment. There's a business casual that's more acceptable when you're not on official dress for the occasion kind of thing. And it's really important to consider what is the environment, what are the expectations, and who's going to be attending. It's always better to err on the side a little bit of overdressing than underdressing in professional settings, because even if you're overdressed a little bit, you can do things to loosen, to relax your appearance if that's important. You know, if nobody else has a tie on, take your tie off, but you don't know that's going to be, so you want to make sure that you're how you think you should be when at that particular setting. Okay, Judy.
Thank you, Virginia. When giving a talk, you need to look at your audience and not read off the slide. You need to be familiar with what you're going to say before you say it. When you're giving a 10-minute talk that's a very tightly timed talk, you need to have thought about what you're saying. That's more important than word for word reading off a slide. When you're giving an hour-long talk, I mean, you certainly are going to look at your slides, but they should be cues for you, not sort of a script for you. So think about what you want to say before you say it. I always find that practicing your talk is very helpful beforehand, especially for a more junior person, because if you don't, the time is too tight for you to ad lib. Importantly, this is so important, do not end each sentence as if it were a question. I have known such really, really smart people, and this is often a problem more of women than of men, to end every sentence as if it were a question on an up inflection. This just incredibly weakens your credibility, because it sounds like you aren't sure of what you're saying, and so other people are hearing that and also wondering if you're sure of what you're saying. So it makes the hearer question your knowledge base. This is not the effect you want to achieve. And it hurts you. It hurts you so much when you're interacting with people scientifically, where people are reading your messages very clearly. And if your every sentence is a question, it really weakens you. So don't do that. And a lot of people do it. So make sure, ask your friends, you know, do I do this? Or question yourself if you have any doubt. Please avoid jargon, even when you have a scientific audience. When you're talking to people, we all spend a lot of time learning a scientific jargon. You know, we learn many, many technical terms, but the more clearly you express your message, the more clearly you're able to speak in fairly plain English, you know, using essential terms when you're talking to a scientific audience and clearer terms when you're talking to a lay audience, the more clearly your message will come through. And people don't have to, I mean, people listen to you from many areas of science, even if you're in a particular area of science. And so you want to make sure that your message will be clear and expressed very plainly and clearly, even with a scientific audience. Don't go out to prove that you can say as many technical terms as you can fit into a sentence. We all know them. And even when you're speaking to the lay public, all those people, you know, from law or business, they may have a lot of jargon too, and we're all hoping to communicate with one another using the English language or whatever language you may speak, and so be careful about that. If you go to a meeting, a lot of people, we teach a course, one of our trainings to our young scientists is called Meeting Commando, and it's when you go to a meeting, you should ask yourself what you want to achieve and who do you want to meet. Next, Virginia. Who do you want? You shouldn't go to a meeting, and I see a lot of young scientists do this. They'll sit in the very back of the room, as far back as they can get, in the third row back. They will not sit at the table. Sit at the table. Unless there's a rule that only certain people get to sit at the table, you sit at the table and come and ask a question. Go into a meeting. If you have an outcome that you strongly wish for, don't go in cold. If you need to have pre-meeting strategic meetings, have them before the meeting. I have seen this happen many, many times. You go to a meeting, you haven't done your pre-meeting work, you go in and your outcome gets smashed down as quickly as you get there. Don't go in unprepared. Make sure that you are having the meetings with the key people that you may need to ensure consensus. And if there isn't consensus, don't expect it to materialize in a meeting of 20 people. So you have to do work in advance. Again, sit at the table. Don't sit in the back row. That says a clear message about how you feel about yourself, which you don't want to express. Your viewpoint is important, so please sit there. And ask questions as appropriate. But I always try to have a question ready that is appropriate. I want to be part of the meeting. I want to participate, and so do you. So that's really important. You should weigh in. Do not be afraid to speak up. If people make you feel foolish for speaking up, that's their mistake, not yours. You should speak up if you have something important to say, and you should not be afraid to say it. And you certainly shouldn't be afraid to ask questions. That's how we learn. In terms of going to a meeting, there should be follow-up after the meeting. You should have post meetings if you need to ensure that everyone heard the same message. The more you lead in a way, even though you're not the top person there, the more you lead, the more people will listen to you. And so this is hard for some people. A lot of people, about 70% of scientists and physicians are introverts, it turns out. And so this can be hard, but yet the more you take charge of what you want to happen at a meeting or when you give a talk, the more beneficial it will be. Because this is your career and you should be running it. You should not be dominating all the conversation, certainly not. But you should at a meeting be participatory, and that's really important. And again, I think the message that I'm giving, and also Dr. Miller, is that when we are speaking, you know, we're trying to bring people along with us, and we're trying to get consensus, and we're trying to give scientific messages, and how we present ourselves may determine how people listen to us. So that is very important.
And this follow-up is also key. Sometimes you need to go back to your desk and send a quick email to everybody that's there, summarizing the key points and the tasks that people are supposed to have in terms of their productivity. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So if we're to be present in a meeting, what does that really mean? Well, part of being present in a meeting is not just talking, but it's also listening. And this listening involves what you see in the persons around you, including the cues in the room. You have to read people's facial expressions, what they're saying, are they taking notes, and really balance your participation. You don't want to be dominating the meeting, you want to be participating in it, and that means being inclusive of listening to other people's ideas. Nothing drives me crazier than having somebody come to a lab meeting or a class and have their phone or alert device on, and they're constantly looking at their watch for emails and whatever. That means that they are not present in the room. And if you're leading the meeting and that's happening to you, you are not present. Now, yes, there might be very important emergencies. Physicians used to have pagers, now we have cell phones. But for most of us in the research environment, leave your phone device at home or in your office when you're at the meeting. We got along many years without these, and we ended up just fine. Keep eye contact around the room. If you're answering somebody's question, make sure you look at them and not at somebody else. And make your eye contact go around the room to show that you are trying to engage everybody at that table. And you'll see how many people are not engaged when you do that. If somebody's talking, it's okay to write down points, and you can repeat what you heard to make sure that you are understanding the individual's point of view or the controversy or items that might be coming up. And you are encouraged to use bridge statements to use those points, repeat what you heard to come to the next question or statement that you want to conclude or include. Don't be afraid to summarize all the points that you've heard. This is really important at the end of the meeting. Let's go over what we've decided and list whose task it is, or summarize the points that are tabled. Am I correct in understanding that this, and this are the key issues going forward, or whatever? A lot of us, when we deal with people in meetings in terms of executive presence, we talk about the consequences of what might happen if we don't do those things. We want to invert that triangle and really spent a lot of time when we're working with individuals to define the expectations for them. Remember, part of executive presence is requiring individuals to work at a higher level than what they usually think that they are capable of. They can't do that unless they clearly understand what is expected of them, even in the new roles. The more time you spend in the expectations, the less time you're going to have to deal up here with consequences of not having your expectations met or the task completed. There should be some time for dialogue regarding those expectations and to what variations might be expected in terms of various scenarios that have that are met. And if there are consequences, these have to meet 3 important criteria. You have to have control over the consequence that you're discussing. It has to be relevant to the person, and you have to be willing to execute it. So if you are threatening to, or one of the consequences is if you don't submit the abstract on time, you don't go to the meeting. You have to be willing to just hold that over. That's something that you have control over. It's relevant to the other person, but you have to be willing to execute it. That's just or if the paper doesn't meet this deadline, you're no longer going to be a senior author or a first author or whatever if these tables aren't completed, so on and so on. You can carry that to other expectations in terms of running your laboratory, but also to yourself. What are the consequences of you of not being, of things that you don't have control over or have control over, and that may affect your life? You can use this kind of diagram in your family situations as well. A famous phrase by Harry Truman in World War II was, "The buck stops here." This was a very, of all the nations in the world, the United States is the only one to really launch a nuclear weapon. And that decision, the president took full responsibility for it. I recently heard Governor Cuomo say he takes full responsibility for all the shutdowns and so on in New York, and he actually used this phrase, "the buck stops here." So this is something that when you have full executive presence and command of the situation, you really are responsible for the outcomes. And I'll just end that with, you can put your face in that square, because the buck really does stop with you and how you're going to develop your career and go forward in terms of seeing yourself as others do and presenting your material in a way that commands interest. Now,
Can I say one thing,
yeah,
Virginia?
sure. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, jump in.
It's really interesting. I get a lot of questions about how to get promoted from mentees and how to, engage in career development. But remember, it is your career. So be the person who takes charge of your own career. Listen to your mentors, but it is your career, and never forget that. So the buck does stop with you. Remember that.
Yeah, if you're getting ready, not sure if you're not waits for somebody to say you're ready for promotion. You have to ask that question, or you say, "I think I am ready," and find out what you need. Or if you're ready for the next step, or if you're giving a talk, if you don't know how others see you, today with the phones and so on that we have, you can easily tape yourself while you're practicing your talk, and notice what you do and what you move and how you say, how you use your hands, what phrases you use. Or you said anything, well, yeah, those kinds of things really take away from your executive presence. We all do it, but you can learn to be conscious of it and reduce those inputs. This book, Seeing Yourself as Others Do, I came across in an airport. And how did I know I came across in the airport? Because I had to drag this book out for reread it for this presentation. And in it, I found my ticket from 2007 on Northwest Airlines. So, and when I was reading it, my reaction was, why didn't somebody tell me this 30 years ago? And that is one of the reasons why we wanted to present this material for you today, because you're all in the stages of the career where you can benefit from this information. And there's lots of books around here. This is just one that I found very useful. These are 2 individuals that are from Minnesota based, but I just put their names up there to indicate that locally, check out people who are coaches. Sarah Vander Zanden has done some professional coaching with each of our Birch Scholars, and Carl Speak in terms of branding yourself, be your own brand. Who do you think you are? Do others think you're there? And how can you manage yourself to come up with that? Is a program that we have used here for our scholars, and I think they are also using it in Kentucky. It's very effective. You send a survey to 30 of your friends and enemies and have them pick out words and see if they match how you describe yourself. And you really get a good look at how other people see you, and really I can identify those key areas where you need some work in terms of modifying your executive presence and leadership styles. So that ends our formal material, and I think if we haven't answered your questions, we are willing to take on some more. I'm going to stop sharing this screen. Is that okay, Natalie?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There we go. How's that?
That's good.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Drs. Miller and Regensteiner. I think that was all wonderful advice, and you answered many of the questions that were submitted. A reminder to the panelists, if you have additional questions, you can type it in the chat bar, and I can bring those questions up to both doctors. I think we'll start with really two questions that people submitted, which are probably on everybody's mind, which are, what are the effects of gender on executive presence, and how might strategies differ for men versus women?
I think I'll take the first shot at that.
Go.
There are quite a few gender differences in executive presence issues, and it's not universally true, though. There are men who have concerns about executive presence too, so I don't want to completely say that these are all women issues. Women do tend to do the thing that I mentioned before of ending sentences on a question much more than men, and it's very disturbing to answers, and that is a woman predominant characteristic. Women tend to suffer more with imposter syndrome, so that influences all the issues that surround giving a talk, going to a meeting, and general professional interaction. These problems do tend to be more accentuated in women than in men. But there are classes and there are career development courses, for instance, that we teach in Colorado, and I think at the Mayo Clinic also, about how to work on those issues and how to, get more confidence in yourself. And partly, I think feedback is very important. Working with a coach, as Virginia suggested, is a powerful tool. Working with your mentors is a powerful tool. Hopefully you're in a relationship with your mentors, or at least some of your mentors or one of your mentors, where that person can tell you honestly about such issues if they perceive them and you don't. One powerful tool about self-knowledge is called a 360, where you have input from many people, including your boss, your colleagues, and people that work with you, and you can learn quickly about all your blind spots that way. Kind of a painful tool, I will say, but it is an effective self-knowledge tool. What we offer, and what I'm sure other institutions I know also offer, is some opportunity for executive coaching for some people, because some people have worse problems with this than others. So for both men and women, having executive coaching can be a powerful tool. But clearly these issues are faced more by women than men.
And I saw another question coming up about in terms of not only gender, but also the culture in which you're in terms of whether it's more of a patriarchal culture, as we still have in the United States, but even some other ethnic groups may be more so. One of the things, I came up in the system when there weren't many women. So I only had male role models, and at one point I was too harsh, and I was told by my dress and so on that my, this very constricting shirt and tie like thing really was off-putting, how to soften your appearance, where in an attempt to be professional, there is still some need to be feminine within that in terms of activity. So it's really up to an individual, but one thing that's really helps in terms of modeling your behaviors and looking at the differences between males or females or men and women is that who do you see in leadership roles and what characteristics do you like about them and want to model? And that's a good example. I think it's always harder for women to succeed in leadership roles than men, but there are many out there who have and are quite successful, not only in the academic world, but in the business world as well. So I think we should model those. And in terms of with different cultural environments in which you may find yourself, take the cues from that environment. There may be different tricks or not tricks, I shouldn't say, hints of how individuals in those leadership positions in those cultures have succeeded. And I think you look around the world and there are many examples in many different cultures of women leadership in national settings where they have succeeded when it has been typically a male-driven environment. And I think the opposite's true too. I mean, when I look at our Women's Health Research Center here in our leadership team, we have very few men. And so we want to be able to include their ideas as well, because the more diverse the people sitting at the table, the more diverse ideas you're going to have. So I think it's equally difficult for men to fit into an environment which is typically dominated by women.
And we want men to be there. A quarter of our young scientists, of whom we have now 70% are men. And that's just strongly encouraged, but that's a really good point. We want men to be in the leadership of women's health endeavors as well.
Thank you both. I think you probably answered one of the questions on the chat. I'm going to combine 3 questions that were submitted that were similar into one, which is, how do you maintain professionalism and executive presence while still maintaining your own personality, sense of humor, and seeming approachable? I think you briefly touched on it, but we could probably spend some more time on this.
Well, I think initially for you to gain credibility, you cannot be funny. Okay, you may have a really good personality, but if you're giving your first talk at a scientific meeting, you want to be accounted, you want to be known for what your knowledge content is. And if you feel confident about your knowledge content, then as you develop that, you can incorporate more of aspects of who you might be in terms of slide presentation style or a joke or whatever. But in a professional setting, even at meetings and in the workplace, I was once told when I started here at Mayo Clinic, we are not about having fun. We're about, you know, there's no fun here. Now we're all about joy. So we're joy in the workplace. So it's not an easy thing to do. And I think if you look at the leadership people in the Birch team generally across the nation, I think all of them exhibit executive presence, but they all have their own personalities exhibited as well. It all comes from knowing exactly who you are. You know, how authentic are you? Do you say what you mean? Do you mean what you say? And how can you do that in a way that really embraces people rather than puts them off? That's what I have to say. Judy, help me out here.
Sure. I think personality emerges as you get to know people. But remember, first impressions are when you, it really goes to what Virginia said. In part, women are less likely to be judged funny, even when they try to be. And this is completely unfair, but it might be as it is right now. Hopefully that will change. But I think you have to present well on your first impression as a serious professional, not a harsh or strict one, but a serious one. And then as people get to know you and you develop a reputation, then you can be more and more yourself. But really, it's not that different from when you make a new friend. Your first impression will be important. And people won't see all of you when they first meet you, but they'll get to know you and know who you really are, for sure, as time goes by.
Consistency in who you are is really key. I mean, I have, my children have said to me, Mom, we're not going to tell you this because we know exactly what you're going to say. So I think that happens in my laboratory when I had one as well, is that people knew the standards that I was expecting. And when you spend a lot of time in that expectations piece, that helps explain yourself as your personality.
My daughter said to me, she's 25, and she has said to me, "Mom, don't try to be funny." You know,
You can't be.
get embarrassed by their parents, but it made me think and when people get to know me, I can be funny. So it's just a matter of time and getting to know people. So it's very authentic. You are who you are, but give people a chance of getting to know you as a scientist, and then they may also get to know you as a person.
Right. Taking yourself seriously as a scientist, as Judy said on her very first slide, is the basis. Your knowledge base is where you're going to go professionally. If you don't have that squared away, you're not going to make it.
Right. Well, thank you. We had many questions about confidence and imposter syndrome. So I'll take a few of these and then maybe do some more from the chat. So what are some strategies to build confidence and overcome imposter syndrome?
One of those, interestingly, is practice, practice, practice. So when you're giving a talk, go up there very prepared. Practice that talk to your willing or unwilling friends and family, or only if they're willing, to listen to you. Practice it for yourself. Be very confident when you go up there that you know what you're going to say. At the beginning of your career, that's extremely important to feel confident in what you're going to say, and practice can help you get to being confident. Another is to run ideas off of a close friend or colleague before you may present them at a large meeting. Building the pre-meeting work that I mentioned before is also very important to shore up your confidence that what you're going to propose will probably be accepted. And it comes over time. At first, a little bit of fake it till you make it is a little bit true. You have to go out there and present yourself seriously. And after a while, it gets easier, believe it or not. It's always hard. I mean, there's never a time where you don't feel slightly, take a deep breath. But I think that there are ways to become more confident. And in addition, working with an executive coach, if you really struggling with that, can be a big strength, as you mentioned before.
Your research area is really your area of expertise, and you should feel confident with that. However, if you're starting something new, it doesn't detract from you to saying, I'm not really familiar with this material, but this is what I have. This is what I have found out, okay? So one, you're admitting that maybe you're not the expert, but two, you're also showing that you had the initiative to go and look at that material and bring up your ideas, and that you're willing to listen to new input from that. To be prepared for a meeting, to go in with the ideas, gives you the confidence, and especially when those things are accepted, is where it happens. And it's okay not to, it helps with authenticity and with confidence. If you are asked a question and you really don't know, to say, I don't know, okay? That's not going to take your, but then follow it up with what you're going to do to find that out. Have an side meeting, look at different material. Do you have, or ask the question, do you have materials that will help me understand that? And that'll get over that as well. So those would be some tips. I see one come up here too about dominating conversations. Do we want to go to that one, or is there, you have another one, Natalie?
We can do one from the chat and then one from the pre-meeting submission. So the comment is, you spoke to the importance of not dominating the conversation in a meeting. Do you have suggestions for how to deal with other people who are dominating the conversation?
That's a tricky one because it depends on where you are in that meeting. If you're in charge of the meeting, it's easy to, it's not easy, I won't say. You have more opportunity, it's hard, but you have more opportunity to step in and say, thank you I think we need to move on to the next point, or I think others, we understand your point as it is, and let's hear what somebody else has to say. If you're sitting there and as a participant and you're not in chair of the meeting, that kind of approach is a little more challenging, but you can bring up and say, we have it's my understanding we have a big agenda and we need to move on, or something like that, to help the chair, if you're not the chair, to move the conversation on. And it's up to the chair's responsibility to make sure that, to control that particular situation.
It can be excruciating. You can be sitting there and one person goes on and on about their own particular concern, way beyond what's reasonable. And some committee chairs will shut that down and politely move on, and some won't. And then you can be slightly doomed in that effort, but a good committee chair will not allow that to persist. So it's not your fault. But there are times I think it's easier to interfere in that than others.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things you can fall back on. And they don't do these in meetings that we have casually anymore, but fall back on Robert's Rules of Order and interrupt and say, Madam Chair, or so-and-so who's in charge, are we keeping to the agenda? Is this time to move on or whatever? So you could, it's hard to do. And as a junior person, you might think that, you know, I really can't do it. But just try it.
Thank you. We had two questions on a similar theme come in before this meeting, which I think is an important thing to touch on. So the question is, after suffering a setback or having your confidence shaken by someone or something, how do you move forward and rebuild confidence?
That too can be excruciating.
Mm-hmm.
The secret is that the longer you're in a scientific career, presumably you will have more and more successes to buffer those failures. But even today, I do not enjoy seeing that I did not get a grant or had a manuscript rejected. And it can be crushing, depending on the effort you put in. You talk to your mentor, get the feedback, get the perspective that this does not mean that you're a failure scientifically. It's just, you know, with grant review, it can be just bad luck. It can be, you know, misinterpretation. It can be that you didn't tackle things in the best possible way, but you have to sort of suffer briefly, but then move on. And I think it's helpful to process it with your friends and particularly with your mentors, because they will reassure you, since I presume, you know, all of you are Birch scholars, you're very talented people, and your mentors know that and will try to help you get perspective on how one, you know, setback does not a bad career make. You have to take the long view, and it's harder when you're younger. And
I think also that so you do have a setback with a paper or a grant, you have to separate yourself from it. The criticism is not on you as a person. It's against this inanimate thing out there, the grant or the paper, which, yeah, you've put some work into it, but it doesn't affect, it's not a reflection of you as a person and who you are. It's an effect of a product that you have produced. Many products come to the market and fail, right? In business and innovation, we expect failure. And so I think we have to expect that everything is not going to be perfect. We're not going to get every grant. We're not going to get every paper, and not everybody's going to love your idea. And if you do get a very critical critique or whatever, put it in a drawer for a while and don't look at it. Talk to your friends or whatever, and then bring it out with the attitude, what didn't I convey? What was missed? How can I change this to make it better? And it may require some talking about it, but again, if you depersonalize it and look at it as an object instead as a personal part of you, I think that really helps. And it's harder for women to do that than men, I think. That we tend to think every criticism is against us rather than, you know, well, that was just a bad idea. Yeah, okay, let it go and be on. The other thing I think that really helps with that is that if you make a mistake, you have to admit it. And you have to be willing to forgive yourself. And that's another thing that's really hard for women to do, is to forgive themselves and not keep churning the thing up over and over and over again. And you have to be willing to forgive others too, because if you don't, then your working relationships will never succeed to the level that you require individuals' expertise, that you may not necessarily appreciate their style or their whatever, but you want their intellectual composition. So you have to really learn to depersonalize, and also forgiveness is huge.
The other thing is that your best strengths are often also your strongest weaknesses. So taking it personally makes us work really hard and try really hard to do the best we can, but it also makes you vulnerable to feeling bad about yourself when things don't go well. So you do have to temper that. And what Virginia said is incredibly important. When you respond to reviewers, all that feeling has to be put in the drawer, and you just got to respond to what they're saying and to make your work better. Some people get annoyed at reviewers. In fact, everyone.
Yeah, we all have.
Right. But you can't express any of that when you're responding at all. No tone, no snarkiness, no attitude can be present. So take the time to feel bad about it. But remember, this is just one thing, and there'll be many successes to buffer it.
Yeah. If you're snarky with a reviewer, it's not, it's a death, it's a kiss of death for the paper.
I've seen people do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not pretty.
Mm-mm. Okay,
We've
so
had one more question on the chat came through. Any suggestions on how to balance being authoritative with being nice? I've had the experience of nicely asking lab staff to work on something, but it ends up being lost in the shuffle. As a young female investigator, I feel like I'm not able to convey authority. Any ideas?
okay, that's where you look at your triangle, and you need to spend some time in your expectations. If you've asked somebody to do it, do they understand that it's emergency? Do they understand that it's the priority that you're placing on it? And if it's not done, you need to address it. I had asked you to, there's some steps you can take to say that. I've asked you to complete this work. It hasn't been done. Do you have an explanation for why? Blah, blah, blah. Well, did I make it clear that this needed to be done now? Here's what I expect you to do. If it's not, here's what the consequences are. So you can still be nice, but you need to say, I mean, I expected this today. How come it's not done? That's not necessarily not being nice. It's just being that your expectations weren't conveyed in a good way. I mean, we've all had this experience with running a laboratory to the point where I thought people would show up, and I had to end up making a list of expectations for my summer students to say, show up. I mean, and sit down and go over the list with them, that if there's an experiment on and you're not there and somebody's counting on you, you need to let that person know ahead of time. So sometimes the things we take for granted as what our expectations are not being conveyed to the other person. So you can, I think spending time and expectations really is where your niceness happens. If that doesn't happen, then you need to go to the next level. It's tough. We all like to want to be liked.
I think it's partly through experience, less of that happens because you get better at hiring people. And the people you hire as research assistants will be the kind of people you want to work with. And if somebody is really a good person, you can trust they will work their hardest. If somebody, and beating them up won't help. If somebody's not a good worker, then they're not going to become a good worker because you beat them up. So I find myself giving some instruction, and sometimes it, you know, I do give directions certainly, but with the people mostly that I work with and have surrounded myself with, they're more than motivated to try to do the best. So there might be a reason why they're not. There might be a personal reason, or sometimes a conversation offsides can help alleviate that.
So I can mention our own experience with our Birch over the years. When we first started, we had certain expectations of what the scholars and the mentors would do. Over the years, we now have an orientation meeting when they bring them on with the scholar and their mentor and go over a list of expectations, including their, effort certification, showing up for career development, and so on and so on. And actually with the mentors as well, because sometimes there's a problem with them and not releasing the fellow or the student or junior faculty from other responsibilities to allow those activities to happen. So you think it's just at your level? It comes up. We continue have to learn how to spend time in that expectation space.
We have 6 minutes left. I think maybe time for 2 more questions. One I think is particularly important as now we're social distancing and moving everything to virtual spaces for a few weeks or months. There were a couple of questions about executive presence and professionalism in virtual spaces. So how do you project confidence or have executive presence during remote conference calls or Zoom meetings with many senior people nationally when maybe you can't be seen or you're not, standing in front of a room?
I dressed more formally in my living room or dining room than I normally would at home, for sure, because I could not see myself talking about executive presence and not be dressed appropriately and professionally. So that's one thing. I think it helps us remember at a time that is very difficult for everybody. A lot of the unknown factors make it even harder. I think we have to, really work hard to keep these conversations going. And this is a professional interaction that we're having right now and not a casual one. And I remembered that.
I did the same thing. I'm dressed in professional clothes today. I'm actually standing at my desk rather than sitting, and I'm in my office, okay? Only because the camera situation is better than at home. But here's the idea where other pieces of executive presence come in that we talked about. Your voice, how you say things, the pace of it, whether you're prepared, all those things are going to come out in how you interact in a virtual space. If you're not prepared, you're not going to know the agenda. You're not going to have questions ready to ask. If you're not actively listening and being present, you're not going to be taking notes and you're going to miss information. So I think I don't see any of you, okay, but that hasn't affected how I'm presenting. And even though I'm virtual, both Dr. Regensteiner and I realized that we had to be professional in terms of our physical appearance and our voice demeanor as we went today. So maybe we've been good examples, I hope.
We hope. And we practiced, by the way. Dr. Miller and I practiced and met about this talk several times.
Yep.
And I think can't get away from it no matter how senior you are.
Yeah, we revised the slides multiple times, didn't we?
We sure did.
And in practice going back and forth and how we were going to do it, because there was a lot of material and many of the questions that you had addressed really incorporate more than just executive presence in terms of presentation skills and meeting skills and so on. Each one of those could have a separate program or career development aspect in and of itself. So we were very challenged with trying to provide you some key information that you can use today that really covered the topic of executive presence.
That was excellent. I've had other mentors tell me, if you're speaking on a phone meeting or conference call, that it does help to stand up because you naturally project and sound more confident when you stand up. So I think that's a great tip for everyone. And earlier, Dr. Miller, you mentioned the importance of putting down your phone. I think it's even easier to be distracted on virtual meetings than in-person meetings with even less accountability. So that's a personal goal for me in this month of virtual meetings, is to turn it off and put it away. So we have 2 minutes left. And so in our last 2 minutes, I want to end with a broad question that someone submitted, which is, what is your best piece of advice?
Mine is to surround myself with people that I enjoy working with, and you can't always kick out the ones you don't, but to look for people who are both smart and nice. There's lots of smart people in our world, but to me, you also have to be a decent human being as well as a smart human being. And that's really important to remember. Work with people that you respect and that you have a good journey with in your science and in your life, because that makes it so much better.
And as you go through life, my piece of advice was really get to know who you are, know yourself, know where your strengths are, know where your weaknesses are, and be willing to adjust and improve and be authentic. Once you know your material and you know who you are and where your strengths are, you will be able to be authentic. So that would be my advice. I
want to thank Dr. Natalie Nokoff, who did an outstanding job moderating this discussion and session today. You did a beautiful job, and it was great. Thank you.
And also to the Emory team that continues to provide us the resources for these video conferences, which I think are very valuable for our scholars and really help bring the whole Birch program together in terms of achieving the goal to have a national resource of outstanding investigators leading research in women's health.
Thanks to Ms. Kayla Smith for organizing us and making us do this properly and doing such a beautiful job.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Drs. Miller and Regensteiner, for your words of advice. Thank you to all the participants from joining us today, whether from work or from home. When you exit the webinar, there will be a survey that will appear, so please complete that upon exiting, and stay tuned for the announcement for the next speaker and next date of the webinar. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Do we leave now? Sorry.
Yeah, you can leave now. You can hit the leave meeting button.
Okay. Bye, Virginia.
Bye-bye, Judy.
Bye, Natalie.
Bye, Natalie.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.